Opera. It's all divas, decadence, and drama, right? Well, not quite. Festival Opera is thrilled to bring you our interview series Behind the Mask, and I'm your host, Ruchi Capella. Artists and collaborators share their stories of blood, sweat, tears, and triumphs in navigating performance careers and their unexpected paths to full on love affairs with classical music. We embrace creating a platform for discussing current social issues in the context of opera as an industry and humanizing the arts. Join us for these approachable, inclusive, humorous, and candid conversations. It's opera unmasked. Hi, I'm Ruchi Capilla. I'm social media coordinator for Festival Opera, and I'm thrilled to bring you our first episode of Behind the Mask. Today we sit with Zachary Gordin, who's our general director at Festival Opera, a baritone and vocal instructor in the Bay Area. Zach, thank you so much for chatting with me today.
It's such a pleasure to get this series started with you, and it's always a joy to talk with you.
Yes.
Always.
I so this is a chat amongst friends. I just want to remind everybody who's watching, we met maybe 11 or 12 years ago when I was attempting to get this audition tape ready for conservatory. And looking back now, it's this connection that we had, Zach, that helped me reframe my understanding of the voice and challenge my perspectives about what's valuable about the voice, what we should highlight. And we've enjoyed this overlapping professional relationship and friendship for such a long time. And it's really helped me develop in unexpected ways. And so it's such an honor for me to get to sit with you
It's
today.
that's a lot of pressure for me to, to have all of that feedback. Thank you. Thank you for saying, and I'm honored to have that impact. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to start and dive into asking about how you discovered your musical talent initially.
Okay. Rewind a long ways. When I was a little baby, uh, probably pre able to walk, I could sit down and listen to music and have attention for it. Um, my I grew up in a house with my mother and my grandmother as a kid, and then my grandmother had this affinity for classical music. She grew up. She was adopted by a family that had a lot of interest in classical music, and so when I was small, she'd always have like the classical radio station playing or the Met Opera broadcast playing on the television, and I would just sit there and I would try to soak it in, to the point where it was about time for my third birthday and I really wanted to learn the piano. So I was begging to have one, and we didn't have the resources to buy a piano. So my mother did the best she could and got me this little electronic 4 octave Casio keyboard that
Mm.
had keys that were about, maybe 3 or so inches long. So my little fingers could start doodling and making music. And from there, I learned how to read music pretty early on, and I could sit down and jam. My great grandfather was a pretty accomplished organist, and though I didn't see him a lot when I was small, he knew that I'd go to his house, and the first thing I do is I'd run over to the organ, and I'd try to climb up on the bench. Um, and he enabled it. He sat me up there, showed me how the thing worked, and eventually I got it. And so that was the beginning of my musical journey. My voice came along a little bit later. I started making vocal sounds and was sort of discovered by other musicians in our community and was given lessons and mentoring uh, from the time I was 8. And then I started working as a boy soprano when I was about 9 years old, singing solo stuff here and there. And then it all just sort of went from there.
Absolutely. And you grew up in the East Bay and you mentioned having differing levels of access. How would you describe your intersections coming into this work?
Okay, so my intersectionality is pretty robust in that I grew up in a mixed home. My siblings, I have two younger brothers. They're half black and half white, and I was brought up believing, or the story that I was told, was I was also half black and half white. And I had met my father a few occasions. He lived in Oklahoma, um, and we lived in the Bay Area in California. And so, it was sort of like, this situation where my mother had a baby out of wedlock, and that was, I was born in 1979, so it was still kind of a thing. I think we've evolved since then. But I was raised in that construct, having extended family that was very mixed, having a religious background that kind of impacted it. So I was brought up Mormon too. And so there was that element. And growing up in a congregation in East Oakland, you don't think gospel music when you think Mormon church, but we had a gospel choir in our congregation, and I was part of that. I was part of the kind of musical staff of the congregation. I was the organist and stuff. And I was a closeted little queer kid. And so, I came out after I'd gotten married. I was 19, and I was in a hetero cis relationship, and married my wife then, who was my best friend and one of my big collaborators in getting my career started. So, coming out a few years after that, realizing who I am, and that I didn't really fit the bill of, you get a wife and 2.5 kids and a dog. There was this huge awakening that I had. My ex-wife and I are still friends. We're still very close. But I lost everybody at that point coming out. Currently, I am in a relationship with a wonderful man. He's great. His name is Ryan, and we have started a life together. So that's, somewhere, my intersectionality is just all of these things, from the racial diversity to the stories of being othered in ways when I was a child, this little, very, feminine little kid, growing up. Yeah, there's some of my background.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you took some time to share that, because I think anybody walking into a rehearsal space with you, an audition space with you, coming into a voice lesson with you,
Mm,
wouldn't know all of those pieces. And I remember even you getting to share some more of your background with me, and how much that really changed. I think the nature of our conversations and trust and exchange. Um, what was it that connected you with classical music from an early age, despite classical music not being made for you, in terms of class and cultural expectations and where you grew up?
yeah. Uh, I go back to the sound. Um, when I was a little kid and I could sit down and watch these things on TV or listen to them on the radio, the thing that struck me over and over and over was how massive the sound was, how interesting to me that all of these people could get it together to do something that synchronized. That was interesting to me. And of course, there's the visceral response of having these waves of sound wash over you, phrase after phrase, in a way that, I would listen to other things. Like, I had Madonna's first album, and I would sing along with that and sort of have my little party of one by myself at home when I was a little tiny kid. Um, but that was fun and games, and classical music and opera felt like home in a way. It felt like, this is I want to express like this. This is the construct of sound and the construct of communication that I want to figure out. I want to figure out how to do it. And so, thankfully I had the opportunity.
Absolutely. How do you credit your experiences growing up in terms of your expressivity in operatic and concert performance? Because every time I've seen you, there's something very grounded about your approach. Like there's a Verismo sort of idea, as well as the Stanislavski living in the moment with the words kind of approach.
Well, I guess it's a double-edged sword. Growing up in a construct that I didn't have a ton of opportunity, just for financial reasons mostly, and access, and growing up in an environment that was pretty toxic. I think that being able to take a step back from whatever situation I was in and see what was happening, be really observant about what the human experience is and how it manifested in different people. Um, I've always been really sentimental. I think as a result, it's like things are special to me, and so I'm watching and learning to see stories and absorb them in real time. I think has really helped me to be able to convey what that human experience is without the amplification of the caricature hyperbole opera singer, which we can bring the ham when we have to. We can be various form of Muppet when we have to. But those moments when you're talking about an experience, whether it's love or a loss or a connection, or you're in a scene with somebody and you finally meet in that scene, I think it's important to set up that possibility. And I think that the observation skills that I've had to cultivate out of necessity have helped. So I'm grateful for that.
How does that background also impact your voice teaching style?
Mm, I mean, I'm a little bit of a bull in a china shop generally, but I can also I can also be really sensitive to what somebody's going through, or what sorts of obstacles they're wrestling with in the moment. Um, I kind of lucked out in that when I was learning to sing, it was all just a constant act of bravery, and I just did it. But I realize, having worked with singers for decades now as a teacher, and working with undergrads especially right now, um, a lot of people have a harder time than that. And so to be able to break down a situation, whether it's this is how we breathe, these are the elements that are at play when you're inhaling, things that basic, to sort of break down every situation involved in singing so that the singer can really understand, take ownership, and rebuild their own understanding of the thing that they're doing, I think has been vital. So, you know, take 10 steps forward and then talk about those 10 steps to exhaustion until everyone's on the same page.
Right. And I think based on how you describe working with singers and your background experiences, it sounds like you're always trying to adjust language so you're not bringing in those classist, elitist, or purely academic foci or perspectives into the
Hmm.
teaching interaction, which I think is so important. And
I think it's vital. Yeah. Like, if the individual doesn't feel like they're allowed to be involved in that expression with either their own instrument or their own ideas, I think the teacher is preventing great art from happening. Potentially. No, not everybody is going to do it, and not everybody, really actually wants to do it. But I think if you empower somebody's voice and somebody's sense of themselves
Hmm.
and help enable that awareness and that generosity, I think it's important.
Absolutely. When you think about where you came from and all of your lived experiences as a voice teacher, as a performer from such a young age, how does it impact how you cast operas and productions for festival opera?
Um, that's one of the favorite parts of what I get to do, bringing people together. Um, it brings me so much joy to assemble a cast, not just of special voices, because that's an important part of it, of course. You know, we have different roles and different voice types and different kinds of characters and personalities to cast when we're presenting an opera. Some of that is vocal, some of that is personality. I think we all really want to work in a space where everyone is magnifying and uplifting each other and helping to put the work on. So that's important. I'm always considering how relationships are going to play out in the rehearsal process. How, maybe there's an antagonistic quality in a specific role that needs to be brought out with a specific personality type. So, it's not always like, let's just get a bunch of nice people together and put on a show. I think it's nuanced, and I think that when we plan those relationships and we plan those, um, the kinds of interactions that you can set up in advance when you're talking about how characters relate to each other in the course of an opera, I think the rehearsal process goes along so much faster and so much easier. And luckily, I've been in these situations where we get through the first week of staging, and typically we have 2 weeks of staging, and then we're in the theater for a week before we open. And we get to the end of the first week and the show's done. Or we get 3 days in and the show's done. And it's just such a wonderful moment to cancel rehearsals because we don't need them. I find that's a huge luxury. So I've been really lucky to get to work with the people that I've worked with.
Yeah, and honestly, building on that, I want to hear more about like what are your dreams in terms of using festival opera as a platform to support young artists? And
Mm.
what kind of culture do you want to cultivate from your experiences in the communities that we serve at Festival Opera?
Well, if I can tackle the last bit first, and then you have to re-rail me because I'm going to go off.
I'll try
Um,
to bring you back. I'll
okay,
try.
okay. So culturally, I think two big points. One is excellence.
Hmm.
And that's a piece that I really want to uphold and protect at every point. So, excellence, whether it's artistic, whether it's the integrity of the production, the integrity of the voices and the people that we cast, excellence. So that everyone gets through that process, we close the show, and everyone's just proud of what we've accomplished. That's a big thing. Um, Opera's fighting against a lot of sort of negative things. And I found that the worst times I've had performing, or the most difficult times I've had performing, this sense of generosity from my colleagues or from the company or from
Hmm.
the audience is missing. And so I would really like to cultivate a culture of generosity, not just artist to artist or director to artist or administrator to artist, but artist and audience interface. I think there's not enough of that relationship building between individual artists, their stories, why they do what they do, and getting our audiences to understand why that moment is so special when someone's on stage bearing their soul. in an aria or a scene. And I think we can do a better job. So, generosity, excellence, storytelling, engagement in two ways, both ways, audience to artist, artist to audience. Those are things I find important.
Absolutely. Is there any other things that you want to share about supporting young artists through the company?
Yes, thank you. I knew I was going to trail off there. Um, Festival opera is special in that not only has it been a company where younger artists who are coming up in the ranks, learning new repertoire, get to come and do roles that are big britches roles. They get to sing lead parts. Um, and that's an important thing to do, and that's an important thing to support. But we also stay in touch and stay in conversation and stay in this nurturing mode with artists. We have alumni that have sung with us again and again and again. And the festival opera family is a real thing. We like to bring artists back. We like to have to supply these artists with a place that they can actually feel like they have an artistic home. And they're not just Bay Area people, they're from all over the place. Um, but I find that a company, whether it doesn't matter if it's a major international company or a regional company like ours, you can have a young artist program, you can bring people in and you can get them through that cycle. But then what? What do you do after that? And I know from my own experience that I've developed and I continue to develop as an artist. And if I've gone through that motion of, well, I got through this program or I did this engagement with this company, that's just one point in time. And we all get to the end of something, this experience, whether it's a production or a program, and we think, well, there are all of these things that I would have liked to have done better. So I want to give people the opportunity to come back and keep feeding their own ability and honing their own craft. So I think that's vital. I think collaboration with educational institutions is vital because there aren't enough pipelines set up for professional companies to bring in students from middle schools, high schools, universities, and colleges to have access to dream about careers and fulfillment in the arts. And opera is special because it's made up of all of these artistic forms. There
Yeah.
are the costumes, there's the set design, there's lighting, there's makeup, there's a whole bunch going on. And giving them access, giving these students access and giving them support and mentorship in all of these areas. If we're going to see this thing through and make sure that opera and classical music thrives, we have to set these things up. So those are my
Absolutely.
big dreams.
Well, I was so glad that you deconstructed and talked about how you invest in artists not only monetarily, financially with the company, but also with the sense of building history, camaraderie, um, something that will actually support on-stage chemistry for these productions,
Vital.
right?
Yeah.
And I having, been in chorus for Susanna, I could see how your offstage relationships and investment with the artists actually played into their collaboration on stage, their trust with one another.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and we've talked a lot about positive, loving, expansive changes that you want to bring to the opera world and the regional opera in general through festival. But I also wanted to talk a little bit about if you could deconstruct or eliminate aspects of opera culture, what would they be?
There are many. There are many. Having had the experience of a young artist in both the United States and Europe, um, I've seen a lot of things that were really important for me to experience from a artistic fulfillment and nurture perspective. But there were equally destructive things going on at the
Mm.
same time. I think one thing that I kept encountering growing up was seeing myself and others experience various forms of exploitation, whether that's just poor treatment as
Mm.
humans, um, to, you know, outright abusive behavior from directors and conductors, to like sexual exploitation, or, you know, casting couch kind of scenarios. And I cannot explain to you what an ugly, tangled knot all of that is, and how it has really prevented some of the most incredible artists from fulfilling what they could have done were they given the safety and support
Right.
to fulfill their career dreams. So many people that I know who have started this path have gone away from it because of some form of exploitation or some form of abuse. And I just wish that was never a thing. Um, I think genius worship and the sort of pedestals that we see in classical music and opera are very dangerous. Um,
Mm.
the most beautiful part in the art that we do is the collaboration, the the beauty and the magic that happens when people are on the same level and they're growing something together. That's the stuff.
Right.
And you can't do that when one person is on a pedestal and the other person is not.
Absolutely.
You know, I've seen these, whether they're gatekeepers in the industry telling young singers that they don't look a certain way and so they have to change themselves, or they don't sound a certain way and so they have to, it gets very soul crushing to experience. And granted, there isn't room for literally everyone to be a superstar. We don't get participation trophies in opera, but no one needs to be abused.
Right. And also, all of these hierarchical situations squeeze out the life and the spontaneity
Yeah.
and the unexpected, like glimmers of excellence in a production. And we've seen that so many times where there is something that has a lot of money thrown at it, as a
Mm-hmm.
production, but it doesn't necessarily demonstrate, I want to be careful with my words, but vocal excellence or vocal, you're going to have to help me
Well,
out.
and you have to wonder in those
Yeah,
situations what's going on behind closed doors. And I'll just
sure.
say it because I'm not afraid. Um, there are relationships in this industry that are truly based on a power differential, and that is a that is a situation that perpetuates itself over and over. It's like a cycle of abuse, right? It
Mm.
happens again and again and again. And so the next generation comes up and they experience these traumas. And so let's impart them on the next generation.
Ooh,
That's we're at a moment right now socially where a lot of people are starting to cue into what's really wrong. And I'm excited by that. So let's take this huge boat and let's talk about the things that we'd like to see the next generation not experience, I think would be
sure.
great. So,
Yeah.
you've got to maintain some form of sympathy. I mean, even though, we all have bad days on stage.
Mm.
We all have, somebody gets in a tiff backstage and you're trying to get your costume on and you go out and you're like, what scene is this? It's been done. So, yeah.
Right. Zach, I am so relieved to hear you deconstruct and demystify some of these aspects that make opera sound really ostentatious and grand and fabulous. And it isn't that all the time. It is, blood, sweat, tears, getting through to the next scene and trying not to bring all of the kerfuffle of backstage onto the stage where you're trying to sell this idea, this story, this fantasy. And we've all been inundated with images of like Maria Callas, um, being this fashion icon and larger than life character. And so it's nice to be able to hear the more humanistic and more relatable side of what it's like to be in a production.
Yeah.
You highlighted some concerns about hierarchy and how power is abused and how gatekeeping manifests itself in this field. And I also wanted to talk a little about specifically, because I know it's an important topic to you, is talking about body shaming and rigid like image expectations. How has that impacted you in your career, and how are you trying to address that at Festival Opera as well?
Well, like, we're going behind the mask right now. So I'm going to tell you,
Yes.
um, a lot of people that have had exposure to me as an artist or have seen my image on things don't have the whole picture.
Right.
Um, I think there's a visceral response to some of the images that I've been in, whether it's like a Barahunks calendar or whatever. Um, but what people might not realize is that I've had my own experience struggling pretty much my whole life with my weight, with my appearance, with how I present in the world. I didn't grow up with a father, and I had to figure out what being a man was even about. Um, and women taught me. So,
Well, that
so there's that
explains a
piece.
lot. Yeah.
So there's that piece. But I remember being a small kid and having family members tell me that I was fat. And I remember, getting school clothes at the beginning of the fall. And I was always, well, here's the husky jeans, and you have to wear these kinds of clothes because normal clothes don't fit you. And so I was always a heavy kid and through my teen years, until I was about 18 or 19. I lost a little over 100 pounds. And while granted that may not sound like a lot to some people, it was a transformation in how I saw myself, and it was a transformation in how I was viewed. And so I get both sides of that coin of, well, you're damned if you're big in opera, and you're damned if you're fit in opera. And I would just like to see artists treated as artists and heard and seen and valued for their intelligence, for their instrument, for their musicality, for their ability to convey a story, irrespective of what size gown they have to wear when they're in a role.
Right. And I
Because,
think the word that you used is illustrative because you said gown.
yes, you can make anybody a stunning fantasy with lights and costumes. Anybody.
Absolutely. If you invest in that, which is, I think, Jesse Norman talked about that in a very notable interview that's been making the rounds on social media recently as well.
Yeah.
And I'm glad. I'm glad to hear you say that. I also wonder, and I'm probably going off the beaten path a little bit, but people, there seems, along with the classist expectations, the elitist expectations, people really feel uncomfortable with nudity, sexuality, unless it's specifically for a role or specifically for a coding. And we don't, we feel free to respond however you feel comfortable, but I think about like, sex work and all of those aspects are a very real part of the fabric of the world that we live in.
Well,
Um,
it's part of the human story.
right. And even you look at that in La Traviata as well, right? But
Right.
people want to make something acceptable. And so whenever they see bodies, whether they are um desirable or not desirable to them, audiences, people who cast, they get caught up in this perspective of what does this do for me instead
Mm,
of thinking about this is a humanistic person. This is a character. This is somebody with a full breadth of life. And like you said, giving their histories, their intellect, their perspectives more focus than how a person can be imbibed or digested,
right.
right? From just a visual perspective.
I remember when I was coming through the ranks in opera, back when I was a countertenor, in the end of 1999 into the early 2000s, and there was a lot of talk about this phenomenon of Hollywood casting.
Mm,
And so you'd have various singers that had to, be a certain size, and people were getting canceled for things here and there because they weren't fitting a stage director or an administrator's bill for what that character should be shaped like.
right.
I'm sorry, like opera's about people and lives, and people are all different shapes and sizes. And if you can't have an open enough mind to put a body of a human being that has an incredible instrument and knows how to tell a story into a role, then you're in the wrong art form, I think.
Absolutely. I'm so glad we got to chat about that a little bit more. Um, we've talked a little bit about things that you want to build with festival opera. You've talked a little bit about things that you want to deconstruct and eliminate in terms of opera culture and the work that you
Mm-hmm.
do. I want to hear about collaborators that you enjoy. What are some of the qualities or considerations you have when you're looking to work with a singer, a conductor, a composer?
I have enjoyed uh, a life in more than one lane. And I think it's important to give opportunities to artists that might have to have a dual career. They might work in the science field, or they may be authors, or they may have a business designing floral arrangements, or there are all different experiences and careers that singers have to, either because it's necessary for them to do more than one thing to make a living,
Mm,
especially in California,
right,
in the Bay Area, where it is prohibitive on a good day to live here.
right.
Um, but I think it's also special that I've gotten to work with singers that have varied perspectives. I've been in casts with singers, and this is not shade, but I've been in casts with singers that only ever sing. And their life is basically on this hamster wheel of gig to gig to gig to gig,
Mm,
and they're always preparing for the next thing that's coming up. And while that's fine, I think there's a side to that that people don't want to talk about, because that life is the dream, right? I want to be working all the time. And this is the thing that we're taught coming up in school. You're a success if you're booked. But what about the rest of your life? Where do you live if that's your life? And 9 times out of 10, the answer will be, well, my stuff is in a storage unit in Brooklyn, and I live from host family to host family, and I have couch surfing with friends the rest of the time.
yeah.
How do you create strong relationships, create your own backline of community, if you don't really have home? And so for me personally, that's always been one of my highest goals, is to make home. especially because, that was kind of missing when I was a little kid. Um, so, circling back, what I think is important about singers that have robust and varied lives is that the stories they tell and the relatability they have and the sort of easier interface, one-on-one, it's been a plus. So I think incredible voices that are really connected to the artist's intelligence and soul are
Mm,
important. Um, that alignment when someone is singing and you can tell that they're sounding like the thing they're talking about, or they're experiencing or conveying the pathos or the joy of what they're talking about because they're involved
right,
on every level with it. It's great.
right.
Yeah.
And that comes from having varied lived experiences
Hmm.
in your estimation.
Yeah.
Yes. The other piece that comes up for me when you're talking about this is I wonder how, the individual singer, and we'll get to talking about conductors and composers in a second, but when you think about the individual singer and when they don't have an opportunity to build home, how do they advocate for themselves in terms of roles they want to take or not take, or how they
Well,
want to cultivate themselves in art as an artist, right?
this has been the issue with the hierarchy. So they're dependent upon agents and administrators and directors to give them a life or not.
Mm.
And it's a tough situation to be in. And it's painful to not feel like you really have a lot of control over what you're doing. Um, it doesn't need to be that way. I think at best, um, artists should also be business people and be in the business of creating opportunities for themselves. And I think what's been wonderful about the past several years is that you see artists at the top starting to be honest about how much producing they also do. They're not
Yeah.
just like, okay, where's the next role? They're actually involved in building opportunities for themselves because they don't just happen.
No.
So that's it's really encouraging that it's not a dirty secret anymore.
That's great. And also for
Yeah,
young artists who are in training programs, whether it's at the undergrad or graduate level, they need to hear those stories about how you have to understand marketing. You have to understand what it is that's unique about your gift that you're bringing into an audition process.
completely. Because if you don't know what you do better than all the other people, you don't have a groove to ride in.
Yeah,
So, that's huge. You have to do
huge.
and don't buy the lie that to be an artist, you have to be destitute and starving. Shouldn't have to.
You got to diversify your skill set, though. At least that's what I've
Absolutely.
seen from artists that I really value and look up to.
100%.
Um, What about conductors and composers? What are the things that you love about collaborating with them? What do you look for?
It's just that. It's collaborating. It's the ability to have a conversation with somebody,
Mm,
exchange ideas, and build a thing together.
right.
Whether it's you're working with a conductor and you're talking about the vision of the work that you're putting on, or you
Mm,
talk about how the orchestra needs to help this scene by doing this in this way, or perhaps observing a certain phrasing. Same with a composer if you're working on a new commission. Intention, objective, and conversation. They're so important to keep circling back around again and again and again. And, I'm not saying that things need to be edited the death out of,
mm.
but but be able to connect and collaborate in a way, again, no pedestal, everyone's in the sandbox building together,
And
That's my favorite.
flexibility and a mutual respect and love and appreciation for what everybody's bringing to the table, right?
Totally.
Um, I guess my other question is, do you feel like sometimes your concern is, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, obviously, but do you feel like sometimes there is an, it's still like with composers and conductors, sometimes an academic or detached approach in terms of coming
Yeah.
into the work? Is that something that you're concerned about?
Yes, and that's partly my job to help facilitate the space between the creators and the work,
Mm,
to kind of draw those human connections, get artists to start talking with composers and conductors. I think singers, especially, should be involved in whether they're creating a new role or whether they're involved in production meetings for an existing work. You know,
right.
have that set up, because then everybody feels like they want to participate and they bring their own responsibility into the situation. I've said these things about what I want to bring, and now I have to deliver. They can't just phone it in.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'm happy to hear you talking about leveling things out and making things more community oriented, more horizontal instead of hierarchical in terms of creating these works and
Yeah.
bringing them to life. That's so great to hear about. Speaking of which, the Festival Opera Board itself, don't laugh. I have
Yes.
questions, important questions for you.
I'm
The
here.
The Festival Opera Board itself has gone through a number of changes recently, including the development of an equity, diversity, and inclusion board, which myself, Nick Ishimaru, and Timothy Evans comprise. Um, what are your perspectives on these changes?
I am thrilled to be part of an organization that is 30 years old, and we have board members that have been a part of the organization from the beginning. And so, there's a tradition, there's a history there. What I'm encouraged by is that I'm working with a board that knows it's always the right time to do the right thing. And so, having that framework to operate in makes my life a lot easier. Um, when we started having discussions about creating an equity, diversity, and inclusion team, the first thing that came up was, okay, well, this is something that we already sort of see to and have seen to since the beginning of the company. There hasn't been any sort of whitewashed elitist sense in the company's history. And so, bearing that in mind, we still feel an obligation to make things better, to make spaces safer for our audience and for our artists, to make the awareness happen in the community that classical music and opera, even though it has historically been either communities have been shut out from it or have been um, it perpetuates its own idea of, well, it's not for you because you're not this thing.
Right.
I have always wanted to see that narrative change. And so, in having these conversations about forming this committee, it was just obvious that the people that wanted to get involved in it were people that understand why it's so important, because we all live the why it's so important on a constant basis. We can't dissociate from our daily experience of othering, of having to struggle, to work harder than people that might have it easier with levels of privilege that I don't enjoy, that you don't enjoy, the others don't like. It's important work, and to have our entire board be behind it in a way
Right.
that is so loving and supportive and present. It's great.
Absolutely. And I think for Nick, Tim, myself, and you, we've all experienced microaggressions and things that go beyond microaggressions, either as patrons or collaborators, that really line our efforts in this EDI committee. And normally, of course, I would be very reticent to join such an undertaking because there is such a legacy for EDI committees to be that dusty antique on the shelf that you show, any guests that come over. But
Or just the performative aspect of, well, we're woke, TM.
yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah.
I
Oh
don't
gosh.
we're not, I'm not interested in that.
Right.
So
Yeah. And do you feel like Festival Opera's legacy of diverse casting and inclusion was a big part of you agreeing to sign on and collaborate with them?
oh, yes, absolutely 100%. I mean, I'm from where I'm from, and my family and my friends are from all backgrounds. And,
Right.
I think art has to reflect that. You can't tell a human story without all the humans. So,
And it's not going to be meaningful to a current audience unless they can see themselves on stage and they can see
absolutely, like,
their, yeah,
representation, if we're talking about the future,
right.
and at the same time we're excluding the experience of people that don't look like this sliver of society, you're not helping the future. You're shutting people out still again.
Yeah. And, I will say training as a soprano, it was so hard for me to be motivated to train just because I didn't want to play those roles. And I didn't see myself in them. And I mean, I am a non-binary
Well,
speech
you're a
language
baritone, really,
pathologist.
right?
You don't have to tell everybody that. I was waiting for my special unveiling. So to close out on something light, because you've gotten to share so much, but I always want to hear more. What are some of the talents, passions, pastimes that you have that people who don't know you would be surprised to learn about?
Okay. Well, I think I touched on this before. I love getting people together. I love I love community. I didn't have a very strong family growing up, and so being able to create that family of choice with artists, friends, neighbors, people that really matter to me, has been everything. I mean, I am in touch with my family. I do love them. That's not the issue here. I've had um, so much support and so much. It took a village to raise
Mm,
me, truly. And because of that, I want to invest all I can in those relationships. And so, getting my people together and feeding them and popping a cork of wine and, like, catching up on all the stories, some of the best times in my life are built on that. Um, I'm staring at trees right now outside. Um, I love nature. I love being outdoors. I love the ocean. I love that we live near it. Um, and just the space and peace that gives me. Um, I think we know about my gym addiction. I like lifting weights. I like doing the animal thing to sort of have the opposite side of the high-minded classical art, you know, working in 5 languages, etc. It's nice to get away and just throw some weights around. Um, what else? I'm crafty. I like to build things. Um, I've built and rebuilt dozens of harpsichords,
yes.
and they end up in private homes and concert halls and things like that. And so it's been a it's been a nice professional hobby that I've enjoyed since I was like 16. I built my first one.
Yeah, I remember coming to your studio all the time and I'm like, who's this new pet that I haven't met yet?
Oh, it's a problem. It's literally a problem. I think I have 3 or 4 right now. Um, don't tell.
No.
Um, yeah, and those are some of them.
Some of them. Okay, fair
Yeah.
enough.
Hmm.
Let's close out with something frivolous, shall we? I want to do some hot takes. I'm
Okay.
gonna give you a prompt, and I want you to just in a couple of words share what comes to mind. Okay?
Okay.
Okay. What's on your workout or driving playlist?
Okay, I'll try to keep this brief. I generally like silence because the voices are very busy.
Yeah.
I hear music all the time in my head. But when it's not silent, I started listening to very drivey, like hype hip hop, um, strong bass beats at the gym. I enjoy Trina. I enjoy like what does the opera singer listen to? It's all over the place.
Is
It's
there some
all
Megan
over
the
the place.
Stallion on there?
Oh yeah,
Okay, just make
yeah.
just, okay, just making sure. What's your go-to comfort food?
Um, I love anything with barbecue sauce on it, especially pizza that has all sorts of like already, and then
Yeah. With a
barbecue sauce.
drizzle. With the drizzle.
A
Absolutely.
generous drizzle.
That's a plop. That's not That's a squeeze. That's
All right.
different. What about beverage or cocktail? What's your go-to?
Manhattan.
Classic. If you were to choose an alternative career, what would that be?
I have always had a fascination with medicine, but I think that skin conditions have always also been interesting to me. So a dermatologist.
Okay, so you have me on your client list already, right? Okay,
Go
I
back to
need I
school.
need the help, okay? Um, who's your celebrity crush?
Mm, okay. Um, I remember being a lot younger and seeing the first Lord of the Rings and just being gobsmacked when Orlando Bloom came out with those boots on. And that
Yes.
hair, and that hair.
See, this is not what I expected to have in common with you, but that was one of mine too growing up. And, it's very reminiscent of Link from Zelda.
Fully,
Yeah,
which I played
that's
to exhaustion.
yes. Oh man, that means we need a follow-up interview. If you what's your dream or favorite role?
Oh, favorite Joey and Dead Man Walking dream role, Turandot. And if we can just transpose it down a tenth, I'm ready.
Perfect. I want all of the costuming for that for you. Um you just left me with this image in my mind. What would you sing if not opera or classical music?
If I listened to my voice and I did what's right by it, it would probably be really croony American songbook jazzy stuff
Mm-hmm.
because I have this upper extension that kind of just keeps going,
Mm-hmm.
um, and I love using it. So
Sure.
that, yeah,
What if you were reckless?
Turandot.
That's opera. I was expecting you were gonna say like White Snake or something. I'm just giving you a hard time.
Oh,
Um, Well, Zach, thank you so much for taking the time and sitting with me. I know that you have such a busy schedule and you're getting things together. We have all of this fantastic programming coming this year for Festival Opera. So thank you
mhm.
so much for your dedication and cultivating that. And I hope we'll get to do this again soon and share this with our audience.
We have to, and we have to do it over brunch in real life.
Brunch in real life will be fantastic. You sign
Yep.
me up. Sign me up.
Okay.
All right. Thank you
Awesome.
so much.
Thank you. Take care.